Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. You're watching Senior Issues, etc. My name is Sharon Klisch, and I'm your guest host today. Vita Verdon is still in Wishington, Winchester House, recuperating. And my guest today is Miriam Neff. She's an author, radio, and TV personality. Miriam, good morning.
Good morning.
Or good evening, good afternoon.
I'm surprised when I hear you say TV personality. I do quite a few things, but you know what? I'm happy to be here, and I think that things that you talk about are important. So we've got a lot to discuss today, whether it's morning, evening, or nighttime when you're watching.
I would like to cover again, for the people that didn't see our previous program, a little bit about your husband and your children.
Well, I was married to Bob Neff for 41 years, 2 months, and 21 days, and those were good years. I married at 19, and we have 4 children, 2 adopted, 2 born to us. I met Bob at college and came to Chicago with him and finished my degrees at Northwestern. My background is in counseling and education. And in the years that we had together, I was able to travel the world besides parenting and having 26 years in public high school. So I look back and I think, wow, I was kind of a busy lady. But they were good years. But Lou Gehrig's took my husband's life, and it was a hard 3 years, a precious 3 years. And now it's been 9 years, and I have a different life now. And if anyone had said you're going to have a really great, be able to say your life is great 9 years from now, I would have said I'm not listening to you. But the fact is, I have a really great life.
Now, we're going to talk about your second book, which is?
Where Do I Go From Here? Bold Living After Unwanted Change. Bold Living.
Bold Living.
And I didn't pick that title. People looked at me and they said, Miriam Neff, you are bold. Look at what you're doing. And I'm like, am I bold? Well, maybe I am. But it's talking about when something changes in your life, you maybe didn't pick this. It might be foreclosure, divorce, it might be bankruptcy, or it could be losing your spouse, as in my case. But then life isn't over. You know, you're still breathing, you're still here. So how do you step into a bold life, and what happens? And that book that we referred to kind of talks a little bit about how that happened in my life, what it looked like for me, and also some of the pitfalls, some of the dangers along the way.
Now, did this book come about because of your background and you felt you had a need for it? Or was it because you started thinking about the ministry in Africa?
Well, Sharon, what happened was I'd written this book from one widow to another, and what we found was people were taking the principles of the book about finances and family. Men were coming to the meetings. There were women whose husbands were incarcerated. There were people who were divorced, and they were taking these principles because loss is loss. I mean, there are some things about it that are shared experiences. And so someone said, well, you should take the principles and write it to a broader audience, and also include some of the new things you've learned, because at that time I had started projects in Africa and I was doing more new good stuff. So that's how that book came about.
Now, what kind of projects were you doing in Africa at the time?
Well, I'll tell you, it's exciting and it's hard. I started some widow ministries here, information, how to learn about your finances, investments, all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I had traveled the world with Bob, and I couldn't forget about people in other countries. And one of the things I did is I went to Burkina Faso. The capital is Ouagadougou. Don't you love these names?
Yes.
Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou. Anyway, I was there, and I wanted to visit some of the radio people that my husband had helped. And they knew I was a widow, so they said, you're coming here, we want you to teach Bible studies to widows while you're here. And if someone says, will you open the Bible and teach from it, I always say yes. I always say yes. So I went to this church. It was a really hot afternoon. It was 103 degrees. Sweat was running down my leg. It's like a aluminum corrugated roof, open air, no windows, no doors, just basic, real basic. And there were about 200 women packed in that room, and they were hungry. With an interpreter, I opened the Word of God and talked about the widow of Zarephath, the widow and her pot of oil. These are cross-cultural stories of God taking care of widows. And at the end of that teaching time, the leaders said to me, "You'll be back tomorrow, right?" And I said, "Yes." And the next day it was just as hot, but there were probably 250 women packed in the room. But I looked at those young widows. The poverty for these widows was greater than what I see here.
Really?
Greater.
Yeah.
So you know what happens if you see something, a need, you think, what can I do about that? And that's where I thought about the fact that everywhere people need clothing, and in the areas where we go in Africa, there are no Walmarts. In other words, we're not in the big popular cities, we're in the poorer areas. So I knew if I could teach these women to sew, that they could have a new life. And so that's what we set about doing. Now, not easy, but still, this is something I needed. I knew I needed to try to do something.
Now, this all came about because of the second book that you wrote?
No, it really came about, from an inner desire. And I think for people watching today, I think you know when you see a need and you think someone should do something about that, you respond to that. The books were just the books are not the focus of what I do. I mean, it talks about it, yes. But for instance, I saw these women in their poverty in Ouagadougou, or in the village outside of Ouagadougou, and I thought, what can Miriam do about that? My grandma Hattie taught me to sew on a treadlefoot when I was 8 years old on the farm. So I thought, okay, I don't know about pigs, I don't know about chickens, I don't know about a lot of things I don't know, but I know about sewing. So if I can hire a tailor to go to a group of, say, 10 women, or a group of 20 women, and I can raise money to buy sewing machines so that they're machines that they learn on, and then if they come to class for 6 months and we don't pay them to come to class, they have to want to work, they have to show up, they have to learn.
Are you there all of this time, or do you have a group that stays there? And the group that might be doing this, are they native to that area, or are they volunteers that have gone there with you?
We hire a business overseer there that's a national, and that we hire tailors that are local, that already have their own shops, and we pay them to teach these women. Now, I don't stay there. I love the places I go. I was in Albania recently. I love Albania, but I have a lot of things to do here, so I can't go there and stay there, but I can go into a class and I can see whether the tailor's doing a good job teaching. And when I go for a graduation, I can look at what they've made and I can see their skill level. And so far we've been able to give every graduate her own machine, and that way she's really set to go. Like in Africa, they have to wear school uniforms. So we have widows there who now make school uniforms to sell. So it's an economic start for them. It's a way that they can say, okay, I can put my shoulders back and I'm no longer the poor widow in the village. I'm making money. My children can have medicine if they need it. My children can go to school. My children have a school uniform because I made it. So it's a huge game changer for these women.
And how long after the loss of your husband did you go into this venture?
We didn't start this for, it was probably into the 4th or 5th year. And we started with widowconnection.com, the website, within the first year. Mm-hmm. But it's been a process of a step at a time. And you traveled with Don. I know you've talked about how, the good times you had traveling. I thought after Bob went to heaven I wouldn't travel anymore. Well, here I am. So I'm just saying, for some folks watching that say, I don't know what's ahead for me. If you're willing, you're going to be doing stuff.
And open to it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, I have a note here about emotional support with a spiritual basis. Is this one of the things that started you on the road to recovery, so to speak?
It's vital. It's vital. When I went through my period of loss and became a widow, I could read about Jacqueline Kennedy, and she was a brave widow. You know, most of us can picture in our minds her standing, you know, with her small children, you know, and she was a bold widow. But you know what? When I read about her, I didn't get the spiritual. I'm a believer, so I have access to my Creator, God. I have access to pray to Him and ask Him to show me what to do. I can ask Him to help me with ideas. And when I travel and I'm in a tough place, I can say, Lord, help. I don't know what I'm doing here. I need your protection. So I knew that there were other people like me who would heal more fully if they had access to the spiritual part of grieving, the spiritual part of God's comfort.
I think that's so important with people that don't have God in their lives. I feel very sorry for them, because the spiritual end is you absolutely need that.
Well,
You have to have someone to go to at all times.
and He shows up in unique ways. I'll tell you a little funny story about my first project in the Mokatwini village. I know, don't you love these names?
I love these names. How can you remember these?
I mispronounced them a long time before I pronounced them correctly. But my first project, I thought that I'm going to buy these sewing machines and we're going to train these women, and I wired money to the person I thought would be my partner on the ground, and I get on a plane and I've got a plan, I've got all this passion. I didn't get a phone number for who was going to meet me. I didn't get the address of where I was supposed to stay. I knew a name, and in that particular area, Portuguese was the main language, and I don't speak anything but English, I'm very sorry to say. So I go there, and the airport at that time when I landed in Maputo, this was in Mozambique, when I landed at that airport, it was where you get off the plane and drag your bag across gravel to go into an unair-conditioned place. I mean, it was really, really basic. No one was there to meet me. And I sat hours on the crumbling curb outside the airport thinking, what do I do? Now, I prayed to God, and taxis would say, let me take you. And I don't know where I'm going. I can't get in your cab. I don't know where I'm going. I prayed to God. Now, I know that God led a certain guy, we would call them like a bellhop at a hotel. He was there with his hotel sign, and he finally said, it was getting late in the day, he said, you shouldn't stay here alone. He spoke English. We went into a phone book that he could read, I couldn't, and he looked up the name of the organization that was my partner on the ground. And from there, he took me to their office. He was a good person. Yes, I paid him a taxi fare, but that's God. That is God showing up where Miriam thought I had a plan, and I do better now.
God sends His angels when we least expect it, doesn't He?
I think that guy was an angel. So
Yes,
I'm telling you, when you said, what about the spiritual component of this? I couldn't do what I'm doing without that.
Isn't that the truth, Miriam?
Oh, it is.
Really. We need the Lord.
We do, and He shows up. Sometimes when we make mistakes big time, He shows up big time. And I can tell you, no one should look at me admirably because I've made all the mistakes in trying to do things, but that first project was a success. A lot of things were hard. I learned a lot of lessons, but women were trained.
Now, how many countries do you go into? It's not countries, how many villages do you go into
I have
now?
one, when I slow down, I will count. But here's what we do that's kind of different. We don't go someplace and stay. We go and take our we hire the trainers. Typically, it'll be a 6-month program. And then when they graduate, we go away. So in other words, we're not staying there saying, we want you to make this for us to bring back here and sell. Although if someone does that, great, do it. But that's not what we do. I want to train people to be self-sufficient in their location. So we've been in 6 different countries now, and we get now requests from other places, but we have to be careful. We only do what we are able to fund at the time, you know. So, but every project has a limited time, and when they get to the skill level where they're sufficient to earn a living, then we have a graduation, and then it's really up to their initiative then as to what and how they want to support themselves.
Now, do you supply the material in the beginning for them that they're able to sell their wares?
We do. We supply. What happened at first is I was getting a lot of donated fabric. So when I would travel, I would be hauling some big suitcases with good new scissors, because we have some products here that are better than I can buy new someplace. We buy the machines, though, in whatever capital of the country. We don't ship machines. We don't accept donated machines and that kind of thing. But we pay for that because, again, these are poor people. We can't say, well, here's tuition that you need to pay. It isn't. That's not the way it is. We say, if you're willing to work, we'll walk beside you, and we'll take you to that place where you can support yourself and you can support your children. Some of these widows have given their children up to orphanages because they can't feed them. They don't have the means to do that. So when you say, how long do you stay or what countries are you in, we go to a village or we go to a suburb of a town or wherever they want us, and we do the training, and then we go away, and they're on their own then.
So this is a big part of your ministry, but it's not the only thing that you do. Your ministry in Africa. What do you do here in the States? Because I know you're on Moody Bible.
I do some radio. I encourage people. I think basically a lot of times it's information that's not only, I know you can handle your finances, but here's a free download. You can click on this budget form on the website. It's making,
really, that's all included in your website?
I'm wanting to make it easier for a person to get through that change. But for instance, our DVD series is classes of widows talking with each other. We talk about how to get through it. We encourage each other with a biblical basis. Here's what the Word of God says about us. So basically, here in the United States, widows need information, they need equipping, they need encouragement. They don't need a skill set, or they can find other ways to get skills.
They need an ear also. They
Connection.
Need a sympathetic ear, yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for instance, you now, with your loss, you are going to listen so wisely to people that come in your path.
I noticed something in your book where you said that you see people differently.
Yes.
You see people like the homeless and the people that you didn't notice before, but you're noticing them now.
Right, and when I hear about orphans, there's so many, when in a marriage, the man leaves this planet first. Those are orphan children. They have mom, but they don't have dad.
Right.
Now, another thing we found out in Africa was a lot of times when women went into sex trafficking, it started when they lost their dad. For instance, in a couple, whether it's conflict or AIDS or for whatever reason dad dies, mom could not take care of all the children. And typically she would keep the sons because they could work to bring productivity, and maybe send teenage daughter, 12-year-old daughter to cousin or aunt or friend because she couldn't feed all her children. Now, and I look at the compassion in your eyes, we can hardly believe it. We can hardly believe it.
Are we talking, now we're talking the United States, or are we talking Africa?
Well, I'm talking Africa, but also some of the Balkan countries. And
because I'm just remembering what this gal a couple of weeks ago was telling me, that she has a 10-year-old boy now. Mm-hmm. And they're orphans and widows, as they say in the Bible.
And God cares for them.
Yeah, but she's reeling right now. I have to give her your book to read because she really needs that information.
You have new eyes, don't you?
Yes, I
we
do.
have new eyes.
And a different way to talk to widows. Because
Exactly.
people, oh, well, Sharon, well, things will get better. How do you know? How do you know what my
Exactly.
circumstances are? How do you know how I'm feeling?
Well,
Things will
and-
get better eventually with the help of the Lord and time.
Well,
But-
we need to channel that
We do.
compassion to, yes, we listen better, and maybe we offer resources. Or for instance, with these women that we help overseas, if I can help that woman so she can feed her 12-year-old daughters and 14-year-old daughters, whoever takes on those young girls, eventually they will say, I can't afford, or whatever, and then they become street girls. Now, I know this is like an unpleasant thought, but I'm telling you, when you know you can do a little something, and I encourage everyone that's watching this, you can do a little something. You don't need to go to the Mokatwini village, or you can do a little something so that there's a bold step in a new direction.
Yes. We're not faceless, we're not invisible.
Yes.
Yes. And we can make widows, we can make a difference. We
Well-
can make a difference because if we're of a certain age and we're retired especially, we can make a difference out there just by helping people, by taking people to the airport, by doing a myriad of things.
Yes, and you know what? That fills that void that can also be dangerous. For instance, you've heard of retail therapy. You know, some people, when they have a void, it's like, okay, go shopping. Retail therapy, no way. It's a bill that you're accumulating. It's a charge card that is going to melt down by the time you go home and you feel better because you maybe purchased a few things. Now, we're women, so we might think about clothing. Guys go to Bass Pro Shop and buy new things to fit, whatever. I mean, retail therapy and doing something like that can fill a void in a negative way. And what we're talking about is doing something that brings a plus to another person's life, that fills a void in our life, but also helps them through their time as well.
Yeah. I'm sorry, but my mind is just, it's racing right now. So many things that are just beyond what can we do? What can we do? I feel it's so important to get the message out to our viewing audience that they're not alone. There are answers out there. And you're not alone because you're always with the Lord.
Yes, and you know, vintage is a good thing. And I say vintage. We know
love
what
that.
that is.
Yes.
I love the word vintage. But one of the things is, like, sometimes someone may be thinking, well, I don't really have any big, great capability. Look at the little thing of me knowing how to sew on a treadle machine. When I was running around Northwestern's campus getting degrees, I wasn't bragging about that I could sew on a treadle machine. But look at this stage of my life, this little skill that you might say, well, that's kind of a throwaway skill. There are no throwaway skills with God. You know, there's going to be something that you use that you have maybe had a passion for or enjoyed doing, and God is going to take that and let you run with it.
Okay, we have a little bit of time. Is there anything else you would like to touch down on?
Well, a little word of caution. It's easy to kind of hide when there have been unwanted change in our life. It's easy to kind of hoard, kind of say, okay, I'll just hang on to my stuff. It's easy to hand out. Sometimes we want to keep our children close to us by giving them too much stuff or paying their bills. It's easy to find ways to do things that aren't helpful. So we want it to be positive so that we're looking out, not focusing on ourselves, but saying, God, what would you have me do? You know, what's out there that I can do? It doesn't matter if it's small, big, medium sized. It doesn't matter if I'm vintage. Lord, what is it? And he will answer that.
Yeah, we have about 3 minutes. So if there's anything you'd like to add before we conclude.
Well, I would like to tell everyone it's worth taking the risk. And yes, I can tell you, you know now, I've sat on a crumbling curb in an airport. I have been in a village where there was no electricity, and when the lights went out, in other words, when the sun went down, I had to take out my contacts in the dark. I have done things, and you think, well, if she can do things like that, certainly I can. So I can just tell you, don't wait till you think you can do it all right and great and perfectly. Just get out there and take that first step of action.
Thank you, Miriam. Dead airspace.
Thank you for inviting me to join you. I just have really enjoyed these conversations.
Thank you, I have too. I hope that the viewing audience gets a little something from this. And on top of that, I hope that whether they're widowed or just retired people, we count. We count. You can go to, if you had a skill, your working skill, there's an organization called SCORE, and that's retired, senior retired people that help people maybe start up a business or their taxes, health issues. If you do feel well enough, how about picking somebody up and taking them to the doctor?
There are all kinds of things
all
you
kinds
can
of
do.
things that you can do. So although we're vintage, we're necessary.
We are, and we can, little things can make a big difference in somebody's life. So
Yeah,
don't
isn't that the
discount if
truth?
you think something's small. Don't think it's small. It can make any little difference you make, I think, is worthwhile.
Yeah, I just got a new car, and I was talking to someone. The Lord helped me get this car. He gave me this, and I was talking to someone, and I said, "What would I do? What can I do now?" And he says, "How about taking some people that have to go to the airport?" He says, "People don't like to drive to the airport, and it's kind of pricey if you have to get a limousine. So how about taking them to the airport?" Well, I've got, Miriam, I want to thank you again. We have to wrap up. And as Vita would say, when you come to the end of your rope, hang on, because the best is yet to come. Catch the spirit.